In the pre-dawn darkness of North Seattle, Washington, silence blanketed the suburban streets. The clock read 5 a.m. when that silence shattered. Federal agents descended upon a residential address with the force of justice itself. What they discovered that morning would shake the foundation of an entire community and expose a conspiracy that had festered for years beneath the surface of respectability. The morning, everything changed. The house belonged to Dr. Lawrence Whitlock, a 56-year-old hospital director whose reputation had been built on decades of medical service. His name appeared on community awards. His face graced hospital brochures. Parents trusted him. Colleagues respected him. City officials praised his dedication to public health. But at 5:14 a.m., when the battering ram struck his front door, that carefully constructed image began to crumble. Federal agents from the FBI and ICE poured through the entrance. The main floor appeared ordinary enough. Family photographs decorated the walls. Medical diplomas hung in frames. Everything suggested a life devoted to healing and service. Yet appearances can be devastatingly deceptive. The basement told a different story entirely. What lay beneath? Descending the narrow staircase, agents discovered something that defied every assumption about the man who lived above. 22 kilograms of heroin sat stacked and ready for distribution. That's 50 pounds of pure destruction, packaged and prepared to flood the streets of Seattle with addiction and death. But the drugs were only the beginning. Locked weapon caches lined one wall, short-barrel rifles, modified handguns designed for maximum lethality, ammunition crates bearing distinctive markings that investigators immediately recognized. These weren't civilian weapons purchased for protection. They were cartel armaments, stamped with the signatures of international criminal organizations. Then came the discovery that left even veteran federal agents stunned into silence. Hidden behind a false wall was a fully equipped surgical chamber. Stainless steel operating tables gleamed under overhead lights. Medical instruments lay arranged with clinical precision. Every tool, every piece of equipment spoke of preparation and purpose. This wasn't a hobby room or a storage space. This was a functioning operating theater, constructed in secret, designed for procedures that would never appear in any legitimate medical record. A man who had sworn an oath to preserve life had transformed his home into a staging ground for operations that dealt in death, exploitation, and human suffering. Unraveling the network. As dawn broke over Seattle, federal investigators began the painstaking work of piecing together the full scope of Whitlock's criminal enterprise. What emerged was far more complex and disturbing than a simple case of drug trafficking. Forensic accountants working through seized financial records uncovered 23 shell corporations. These entities were registered across multiple jurisdictions: Nevada, Belize, and Panama. On paper, they appeared legitimate, but closer examination revealed they had no staff, no contracts, no inventory, and no actual business operations. Yet millions of dollars flowed through these ghost companies. The money arrived disguised as grants, medical procurement fees, and charitable donations. The sources traced back to Venezuelan and Mexican intermediaries, with known connections to international trafficking organizations. The funds moved in patterns designed to obscure their origins, bouncing between accounts, converted through currencies, and finally landing in places where questions weren't asked. Whitlock's position as a hospital director had given him something priceless to criminal organizations: access and legitimacy. Through carefully managed charity programs and specialized medical partnerships, he had quietly built relationships with inspectors, city officials, and regional administrators. His influence opened doors that would normally remain closed to criminal enterprises. The digital trail. Encrypted communications recovered from Whitlock's devices painted a chilling picture of his operations. Messages contained coded language that investigators gradually deciphered. Phrases like, "Move the patients tonight," and "Border team ready," initially seemed medical in nature. Further investigation revealed their true meaning: instructions for moving human trafficking victims. One folder, labeled simply Logistics, contained evidence that transformed the investigation from a drug case into something far more sinister. Inside were detailed transport schedules for 9 kidnapped individuals. Each entry included medical notes and projected use value assessments. These were human beings reduced to commodities, their worth calculated in terms of their potential exploitation. Adjacent to these files was a comprehensive ledger documenting an imminent narcotics shipment. The scale was staggering: 1 full ton of heroin, coupled with 1.5 tons of methamphetamine and fentanyl. The distribution route had been meticulously planned, utilizing Washington's ferry system to move the drugs under cover of legitimate maritime traffic. The shipment was scheduled to depart before sunrise. Racing against time. By 3:40 a.m., federal command centers recognized they were no longer investigating past crimes. They were in a race against an active operation. Intelligence confirmed that 9 hostages were being held in a cartel-controlled warehouse near the Everett waterfront. Meanwhile, a convoy loaded with narcotics was preparing to move out before dawn. The tactical situation was grave. Surveillance indicated the warehouse was fortified and the occupants heavily armed. This wasn't a simple arrest scenario. It was a high-risk hostage rescue operation that would require coordination between multiple federal agencies. FBI hostage rescue teams, DEA fast units, and ICE Homeland Security investigations formed a unified strike force. There were no lengthy briefings or inspirational speeches. Experienced operators checked their weapons, reviewed floor plans, and prepared for the possibility that this morning might be their last. As the convoy of unmarked vehicles approached the Everett waterfront, agents spotted the first warning sign. Silhouettes moved on rooftops. Spotters with rifles watched the approaches. The cartel had posted sentries, expecting trouble. They simply hadn't anticipated the full force of federal law enforcement bearing down on them. The battle at the warehouse. The assault began with explosive force. A breaching charge detonated against the eastern wall, tearing through metal and sending showers of sparks across the loading bay. Immediately, the interior erupted with gunfire. Cartel enforcers opened up from prepared positions, their weapons spitting rounds toward the breaching teams. Agents took cover behind concrete barriers as bullets chewed into steel columns and ricocheted off equipment. The cartel had transformed the warehouse into a defensive position, with firing ports cut into interior walls and overlapping fields of fire covering every approach. An FBI sniper, positioned to cover the assault, acquired a target on an elevated catwalk. The cartel gunman was lining up a shot at the breaching team. The sniper's rifle barked once. The threat was eliminated before he could pull the trigger. Inside the warehouse, the environment was a maze of obstacles and ambush points. Overturned forklifts created makeshift barricades. Chemical drums were stacked to form bunkers. The cartel fought from multiple levels, using catwalks, ladders, and shadowed alcoves to maintain the high ground. 2 gunmen suddenly charged from behind a row of crates, forcing hostage rescue operators into close-quarters combat. Shields raised, muzzle flashes exploded at point-blank range. A flashbang grenade rolled under a conveyor belt and detonated with a white-hot blast that temporarily stunned everyone in the immediate area. On the southwestern side of the building, ICE agents intercepted traffickers attempting to move the hostages into a refrigerated truck. When one gunman opened fire at the approaching agents, a K-9 unit surged forward. The police dog took the shooter down before he could reload, saving lives in those critical seconds. Outside, 3 cartel vehicles roared to life, attempting to ram through the federal perimeter. The first truck burst through a chain-link gate in a shower of sparks and torn metal. A DEA armored vehicle intercepted it, forcing it into a cargo container. The impact shook the entire row of shipping containers. Above the chaos, A helicopter spotlight blazed to life, flooding the battlefield with harsh white light. The illumination revealed fleeing figures, abandoned weapons, and the unmistakable signs of a collapsing criminal operation. Back inside the warehouse, FBI agents reached the container identified in Whitlock's encrypted messages. The lock was industrial grade, reinforced against tampering. Bolt cutters made quick work of it. The door swung open. 9 hostages stared back at them, terrified, bound, freezing, but alive. Outside, the final shots faded. The last cartel enforcer threw down his weapon and raised his hands in surrender. As the sun rose over Everett's port, the scale of what had just occurred became clear. 2.5 tons of narcotics seized, dozens of weapons confiscated, 9 lives rescued, and a criminal network shattered. The wider conspiracy. As federal analysts processed the evidence recovered from both Whitlock's residence and the warehouse, a disturbing picture emerged. Whitlock had not operated in isolation. He had cultivated a network of enablers and accomplices embedded throughout Seattle's civic and medical infrastructure. Communications recovered from seized devices revealed contact with 20 public officials across Washington state. These weren't accidental connections or innocent professional relationships. They were deliberate partnerships designed to facilitate criminal operations. A deputy sheriff had received recurring payments disguised as security consulting fees. A city health inspector's approval schedule aligned suspiciously with the arrival of cartel shipments. A port employee had signed off on refrigerated containers without conducting proper inspections. Even another surgeon from a neighboring hospital appeared in encrypted messages discussing special transfers and post-procedure compensation. Individually, these transactions were small enough to avoid triggering financial oversight, but over a 5-year period, the total reached $37.9 million. All of it flowing through Whitlock's medical donation initiatives and charitable foundations. These weren't mistakes or oversights. They were calculated decisions made by people who understood exactly what their cooperation was enabling. A community confronts betrayal. When news of Whitlock's arrest broke, Seattle residents struggled to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the criminal he had become. Whitlock had delivered speeches at community events. He had awarded scholarships to aspiring medical students. Local media had featured him in articles praising his hospital's commitment to serving underserved populations. Yet behind that carefully maintained public image was a man who had weaponized his authority to shield a pipeline moving drugs, exploited organs, and trafficked human beings through the Pacific Northwest. Inside city offices, panic spread. Emergency meetings were convened. Supervisors demanded comprehensive audits. Hospitals initiated reviews of every grant, contract, and surgical partnership connected to Whitlock's tenure. Port authorities faced questions they had no immediate answers for. In community halls across Seattle, longtime residents voiced a deeper, more existential fear. If a respected hospital director could be part of such operations, who else might be involved? How deep did the corruption run? Which other trusted officials had sold their responsibilities? The betrayal felt deeply personal because it was institutional. It existed in signatures on forms, in approvals granted without proper scrutiny, in containers that passed through checkpoints without inspection. The difference between lives saved and lives destroyed had come down to choices made by people who had sworn to serve the public good. Justice takes shape. Within a week, what had begun as a pre-dawn raid had expanded into one of the most comprehensive corruption and trafficking cases in Washington state's recent history. Federal Situation Rooms from Tacoma to Washington, D.C., displayed not theories or possibilities, but a complete map of a criminal enterprise that had thrived under the cover of legitimate institutions. The final inventory from the Everett operation was staggering. Agents had seized 2.5 tons of narcotics, 1 ton of heroin, and 1.5 tons of methamphetamine and fentanyl, all packaged for distribution. 324 weapons were confiscated, ranging from handguns with filed serial numbers to military-grade rifles. Bundles of cash, gold certificates, and offshore banking documents totaling $52 million were secured before they could disappear into international financial networks. But the most important number wasn't measured in kilograms or dollars. 9 hostages had been recovered alive and were receiving care at the University of Washington Medical Center. Federal prosecutors assembled charges against 31 individuals. The indictments included cartel enforcers, trafficking coordinators, transport facilitators, and most devastatingly, several public employees who had knowingly enabled Whitlock's operations. Each charge was supported by documentation, signatures, financial transfers, approvals, encrypted communications, and medical logs that matched cartel schedules with precision. Whitlock himself faced the full weight of federal law. The charges included drug trafficking, human trafficking, conspiracy, financial crimes, illegal organ harvesting, and public corruption. His arraignment drew such large crowds that federal marshals had to close the courthouse steps to additional spectators. Institutional reckoning. The aftermath sent shockwaves through Seattle's institutions. Hospital administrators launched emergency audits of transplant programs, donor records, and external partnerships. Every contract Whitlock had signed was pulled from archives and scrutinized. Port authorities shut down terminals for comprehensive security reviews. Police departments initiated internal investigations into officers named in federal documents. In the state capital of Olympia, legislators called for hearings on the oversight failures that had allowed a hospital director to quietly construct a trafficking infrastructure under the guise of community health care. For many Seattle residents, particularly those who had lived in the city for decades, the revelation struck at something fundamental. The harm wasn't only in the crimes committed, but in the institutional blindness that had allowed them to flourish. People who had spent their lives trusting doctors, inspectors, administrators, and public servants now questioned how many warning signs had been missed, ignored, or rationalized away. A system that still works. Yet within that justified doubt, another truth emerged. The system, though badly shaken, had not completely failed. When the threat finally surfaced, federal agents acted decisively. Analysts traced every dollar through complex financial networks. Tactical teams risked their lives to save 9 strangers. The law, though tested, still stood. The empty courtroom where Whitlock had once sat as a respected member of the medical community now serves as a reminder. The nameplate remains. The flags still stand. The bench is polished. But its emptiness carries profound weight. It represents the space where justice must sometimes confront those who were entrusted to uphold it. Lessons for a city. This case transcended the story of one corrupt doctor, one hidden basement, or one violent warehouse raid. It revealed what happens when individuals entrusted to save lives choose power over integrity. When professional credentials become camouflage for criminal enterprise. When public trust is weaponized for private gain. Seattle learned a difficult lesson. Danger doesn't always announce itself dramatically. Sometimes it wears a white coat. Sometimes it signs official documents. Sometimes it shakes hands at charity fundraisers and poses for photographs at community events. But this story also demonstrates something equally important. When institutions fail, people don't have to. Federal agents who could have looked the other way chose to investigate. Analysts who could have stopped at surface explanations dug deeper. Tactical operators who knew the risks went in anyway to save lives. Justice moved forward, slowly, painfully, imperfectly, but ultimately unstoppably. The betrayal was real. The corruption ran deep. The harm was devastating. But accountability came. For Dr. Lawrence Whitlock, for his co-conspirators, and for those who enabled his operations, the reckoning arrived. And in that accountability lies hope that institutions can heal, that trust can be rebuilt, and that the next threat won't be allowed to fester in shadows for years before being brought into the light. The system was tested. It bent, but it did not break. That matters. That will always matter.